Why the Cross by Father Edward Leen, Part 1, The Tree of Death, Chapter 1, Second Reading. Catholics do not utilize life properly because they do not allow themselves to be enlightened by their faith in many of the ordinary issues of social, political, economic, and aesthetic life. It is a strange thing that Catholics so frequently, in their quest after a satisfying life here below, do not allow themselves to be guided by their faith. They do not instinctively apply the principles of faith to the so-called secular aspects of life. For the most part, though this conclusion they would not admit, they treat their faith as though it were useful to secure happiness only in the world to come, not in the world that is. The faith is not only considered, practically at least, as being of no positive help to the realization of ideal life conditions here below, it is looked upon rather as a hindrance. The followers of Christ are, unfortunately, prone to be deeply influenced in what may be called their instinctive judgments of concrete realities by the world in which they live. The art and literature of that world, with the exception of a very small and unobtrusive part, is the expression of the soul of unregenerate humanity and of that soul's ideals. They are the aspirations and the appreciations of unregenerate humanity which find loud and imperious utterance in the works of human genius. This utterance, in 1,000 varied tones, seeks to interpret entirely in its own fashion the fundamental yearnings of the human spirit. Because all people, with the two exceptions known to us by faith, are a prey to the instincts generated by the original prevarication, the voice of this literature tainted with falsehood finds an echo in every human heart. It is easy then for Christians to have their understanding of temporal problems profoundly modified by the prevailing trends of thought. While retaining a firm hold on dogmatic truths, they can be swayed by the world in those questions, the connection of which with dogma is not apparent. This influence of the unregenerate spirit is felt especially in those problems that deal with the ways and means of compassing man's temporal well-being. Those who have the faith, like those who have it not, too often find contact in their social, political, and economic views. They can, alas, approximate one another in their notions of the constituent elements of human happiness in this world. The inconsequent Christian, like the non-Christian, tends to judge the ideal life to be that which would result from the elimination of all the evils grouped under the headings of pain, ignorance, and want, and in the presence of everything that ministers to the taste for pleasure, culture, and ease. The absence or non-attainment of these desirable things is for him synonymous with human unhappiness. When his efforts at counteracting what he regards as the forces hostile to human well-being prove unavailing, he may accept the situation with resignation and seek in his religion a safeguard against misery in the world to come. His religion, seeming to him to oppose itself to his ideas of temporal happiness, will be regarded as offering a post-temporal happiness at the price of present unhappiness. To many, religion appears to demand actual misery as a condition of future well-being. This is a totally mistaken view of things. God means earth to be a preparation for, or rather the vestibule of heaven. God does not demand unhappiness as the price of happiness. He plans happiness here as a prelude and foretaste of happiness hereafter. Such a statement sounds paradoxical to the average person. This is not surprising, considering the manner in which Christianity is ordinarily presented. A little reflection should suffice to dispel the difficulties that the proposition just enunciated finds in minds mixed in the unreal, conventional attitude toward life's realities. It is not the way of God to give things at a price. For him to do so would be inconsistent both with his infinite generosity and with his fatherhood of men. He created man not only for an existence that should endure always, but for an existence that should be a veritable life throughout its whole duration. His plan might involve that this life should be incomplete for a while, but not that it should be, at any instant, lacking in the elements of a true and real life. Happiness for men and the true life for men are identical motions. To live perfectly is to be perfectly happy. To live incompletely is to be incompletely happy. But it means to be happy at any rate in a certain measure. Man is blind to this truth because of his inveterate tendency to identify suffering and unhappiness. If man were, once for all, to rid himself of that false prejudice and allow himself to see the truth, that suffering and happiness are not mutually exclusive terms, he would be well on the way to the solution of the chief problem of life. The great problem for man is, how is he to realize for himself a happy life on earth? Unhappiness has its cause in whatever impedes the realization of a full life, in what militates against man's well-being. God could not but intend man's well-being in creating him. What is more, this idea involves the direct intention on the part of the Creator to provide his creature with the means to attain this well-being, and that from the very beginning of the creature's existence. Submitted, like all living things, to the law of growth, the soul cannot have from the start the whole of its final reward. But in God's design, every movement of that process of growth is meant to be a partial entering into, a gradual acquisition of, the ultimate wealth of life. A man, while becoming rich, enjoys a measure of affluence, though not all the affluence that is yet to be his. If God's purposes were realized, that is, if men met God halfway, each soul could be at every moment happy with the happiness proper to that stage of development which it then has reached. What is more, the happiness it would experience would be essentially the same as the felicity that is final. Human happiness, being of a specific kind, must be essentially the same throughout the entire duration of human existence. There is always continuity in God's plan. He could not have meant that the life of man in time and the life of man in eternity should be of two distinct patterns artificially joined together, a bar of gold riveted to a bar of iron. The soul is simple. Its existence must present a unity, a sameness of texture through its whole length. The happiness of man must be based on the same principle. As long as man is man, What makes him happy as man must always be the same thing essentially. If a rational creature in bliss is judged to be living a life that makes it supremely happy, it follows that the same creature, while on earth, must live something of the same life or be unhappy. Man cannot be happy in two specifically distinct ways. He is certainly happy in heaven. There is, then, no possibility for him of achieving happiness on earth unless he can anticipate in time the conditions of eternity. It is through failure to recognize this truth that Christians in the vast majority are involved in contradictions and inconsistencies in the practical handling of life. They plan their own well-being and that of others on the practical assumption that the happiness of time is essentially different from the happiness of eternity. The logical consequence is that they seek the satisfaction of the human soul on earth in ways and make it consist in objects that are not the ways and objects in the life after death. If their faith teaches them that the blessed are happy because they enjoy a certain kind of vital activity, they should conclude that the road to happiness on earth is to strive to exercise the same activities, practice the same way of living. Beatitude consists in a certain life of thought and love. As the human soul finds its ultimate satisfaction in the life of thought and love in the world beyond, so of necessity will it find contentment and the quieting of its desires in the present world only in living the same life of thought and love as far as that may be done. The great tragedy lies in this, that Christians will continue to experiment in ways and means of happiness as if it could be attained in any other way or made up of any other elements than those just referred to, taking action at variance with the beliefs they profess. For in the light of the faith they could not question what has been stated. Their measures to promote temporal beatitude will be of the same kind as those of the unbelieving world in the midst of which they live. They will pursue wealth, position, and pleasure with an eagerness similar to the eagerness of those who are wholly surrendered to the material and the transient. The worldly Christian divides into the existence that God has planned as one. He will have life before death, governed by one set of ideals. He will allow life after death to be governed by another and different set. The attempt does not meet with success. In spite of everything, the life to come will urge its claims and press its values on the life that is present. The unfortunate Christian is drawn in diverse ways, and his every deliberate choice is tainted with a contradiction to which he is keenly sensitive in the depths of his Christian consciousness. It is mortifying that the faithful in such great numbers do not, in spite of the advantages they enjoy, rise to the lofty ideal of human life formed by the great pagan philosopher who lived 300 years before Christ. Aristotle, seeking to discover what constitutes for man the supreme good, or the ideal life, or simply happiness, rejects with a certain disdain the views that place it in pleasure, in honor, in unsocial and inactive virtue. His tone becomes contemptuous when he refers to the view that makes the pursuit and acquisition of wealth the summum bonum. His investigations lead him to the noble conclusion that the happiness proper to man resides in a virtuous activity of all the powers within the soul, consisting in the regulation of moral actions according to virtue, and in a contemplation of the supreme truth, and in a love of the supremely perfect. There is a remarkable grandeur and nobility in the words with which he brings his philosophic inquiry to a close. He writes, "The happiness proper to man dwells in activities according to virtue, and if there be among such activities any preeminent one, that will be the special seat of happiness. For happiness is preeminent and the crown of all things, and our crowning activity is that of the best among our powers, that power which, by nature, rules and guides us toward truth and the good. It is that part in us which comprehends things honorable and divine. The activity of this power, well and fitly developed, and in accordance with its special virtue, must be perfect happiness. If, therefore, intellect is divine relatively to man, then the life which is conformable to intellect will be divine relatively to the life of man. But, for all that, we ought not to follow the advice of those who bid us think only of human interest as proper to our human life, and of the mortality that all men share. Rather should we, so far as may be conceivable and possible, enter upon immortality and shape our very thought with the aim of living by the standard of the highest principle within us. No man can live a life like this so far as he is merely man, but in so far as there is a divine element in his nature." The life that Aristotle, with the astonishing intuition of genius, perceived as the ideal for man, is made accessible in an incomparably more perfect form to the Christian. What the great Stagirite dreamed of is a reality within the reach of the humblest followers of Christ, and in a manner that surpasses the most exalted visions of philosophy. If the Christian would make use of the forces and powers generated in him by divine grace, he would, even already here on earth, enter upon immortality, and inaugurate that life which, in its complete evolution, brings absolute felicity. The supreme vital activity, which means life at its highest, and therefore perfect happiness, consists in giving the fullest play to the faculties of intellect and will on the most perfect objects with which these faculties can deal. Intellect at its utmost energy of action, will at its supreme energy of loving, that is human life at its best. The reality, source of all reality, the true, source of all truth, that seen in its inmost nature by man's intellect, raises his intellect to its highest power, to its final activity. Beyond that reality, there are no fields for it to range over, no possible world for it to conquer. The supremely attractive, source of all attractiveness, the supremely desirable, the source of all desirableness, with its inmost beauty unveiled and offered to the human will, fully extends and exhausts the will's energy of loving. Grace brings this life within the range of man's faculties. By it, man can arrive at knowing, contemplating, loving, and enjoying God, the supreme truth and the supreme good. The life of glory is but the final development of the life of grace. Hence, the life of glory is meant to be enjoyed here below in an inchoate form. As God planned things, life was to be an unbroken line beginning at birth and continuing everlastingly. Death is not a break, but a stepping stone by which one passes from one stage to another in the same existence. But man will perversely and blindly strive to effect a cleavage in that line and persuade himself that the good of the human life that precedes death can be different from the good of human life that follows death. The result is that he is necessarily at cross purposes with God. It is not surprising that the creature, seeking to gain the goal of life, namely happiness, by a use of life's powers and energies at variance with the design of the Creator, should be continually frustrated in his main object, should enjoy no peace, and should be involved in contradiction and become a prey to perpetual dissatisfaction. What is the way out of this impasse? The way out is through a thorough understanding of the religion of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and a practice based on such understanding. In the foregoing pages was analyzed the dissatisfaction with life that torments modern man. Mankind has a despairing sense of having lost its way irretrievably. This powerlessness to give ultimate reality and meaning and purpose to life's activities affects those who once believed and have lost the faith. Those who have been born to the inheritance of the faith are not untouched by it. Even these have lost the secret of living humanly. It is only a thorough understanding of Christianity, what it means and what it holds out to men, that will enable mankind to recover the secret of happiness.